For the past 500 years, few places have stirred the imagination more than a beautiful and mysterious building in Scotland called Rosslyn Chapel. Some legends claim it has links with secretive organisations such as the Freemasons or the Knights Templar. One extravagant theory even suggests that buried within the chapel is the Holy Grail of Christ. Whatever the truth of these claims, over the centuries, countless writers and artists have found inspiration in the extraordinary stone carvings here at Rosslyn, once described as a poem of stone powdered with stars. My name's Helen Rosslyn, and the chapel's been in my husband's family since it was built. As an art historian, I'm fascinated by the stories behind works of art. To solve some of Rosslyn's mysteries and to reveal the meanings behind these carvings, I'm going to get closer to the stonework than anyone has in years. I'll visit sites across Scotland to learn more about the art of medieval stonemasonry. And I'll also travel to the continent to search for the Norman origins of the men who built Rosslyn Chapel and what inspired them to create such a remarkable treasure in stone. Rosslyn Chapel's greatest attraction is the extraordinary beauty of its stonework. Many of these inspiring carvings are religious narratives, yet the meaning behind some of them has been forgotten. And very little is known about the medieval stonemasons who created them. Just what influenced these largely forgotten artists to cover the chapel with so many intricate carvings is shrouded in mystery. Rosslyn Chapel lies about 8 miles south of Edinburgh. It was built as a family chapel in the middle of the 15th century by Sir William St Clair, 11th Baron of Rosslyn and Prince of Orkney. By the 17th century, the chapel had fallen into ruins, but in 2003 it became famous worldwide when it featured prominently in the Da Vinci Code.
I always love coming into this chapel because I'm absolutely amazed by the carving. It's on every single surface, which sort of makes you feel as though you're stepping right into a three-dimensional medieval sculpture. It's been called a Bible in stone, which is hardly surprising because it is a chapel. And one of the really interesting things about the carvings is that they would have been done in an age when people couldn't really read. And so a lot of the moral stories, like this one here, were done in stone to remind people of how they should behave. And here we've got the 7 virtues, and on the other side of the same flat arch, we've got the 7 deadly sins. You can see a man standing, deciding whether he's going to follow the virtues and end up with St. Peter at the gates of heaven. And the things he has to do, the 7 virtues, are helping the needy, clothing the naked, and then you've got visiting the sick, with a bed and a sick person in it. And then after that, you've got visiting those in prison. And that's incredible, the detail there. If you look really carefully, you can even see a face behind bars in the prison. And then there is feeding the hungry and burying the dead. And the reward is St. Peter, standing with the key at the gates of heaven. On the other side, we have the 7 deadly sins. You have pride, gluttony, anger there with the man and his axe. Now, the most interesting thing for me about this is that one of the stones is the wrong way round. This could have been just a simple human error, but you can see that charity there with the 2 figures is the wrong way round amongst the 7 deadly sins, and on the other side you've got greed or avarice amongst the virtues. So it was probably just a simple case of human error, the poor stonemason who carved the wrong scene on the wrong side of the stone had to put it in anyway because it would only fit one way round, and he just hoped nobody would notice.
Virtually every surface tells a different moral tale.
One of the hidden gems in this chapel is this stone depiction of the Dance of Death, which was also often called the Danse Macabre, because it came really from France, and it reflects the medieval preoccupation with mortality. Each of the figures here, taken from different walks of life, is shown with a skeleton to indicate that death always wins out in the end.
But many of Roslyn's medieval carvings have been covered by modern scaffolding for over a decade. The chapel's been undergoing a £9 million conservation programme. In the aftermath of the Reformation, Rosslyn fell into disrepair. But by the late 18th century, the romantic, overgrown ruins had become an inspiration for artists like David Roberts and Turner, as well as writers like Wordsworth, Burns and Sir Walter Scott. Although there were some early attempts to restore and repair the place, centuries of foul Scottish weather caused severe damage. So for the past 13 years, we've been trying to dry it out by covering it with this 50-ton steel roof. As the Countess of Rosslyn and the chairman of the Rosslyn Chapel Trust, I've been closely involved with the conservation programme.
When I first came here nearly 30 years ago, the stone was so saturated that water was literally running down the inside of the chapel walls. So it was clear we had to do something quite dramatic to make the building watertight. The first thing we did was to put on this protective canopy. And the second phase, which we're doing at the moment, is to fix the roof, the leaky windows, and the rather eccentric medieval drainage system. So that's why this building is such a hive of activity, because in the next couple of months, hopefully, the canopy is about to come off.
The latest conservation techniques focus on preserving as much of the detail of the original stonework as possible, and learning from some of the mistakes of the past. In the 1950s, the walls were so damp that a decision was taken to clean the internal stonework and coat it with magnesium fluoride, also known as cementitious slurry. Done with the best of intentions, it had the unforeseen consequence of obscuring much of the original detail. The man in charge of the conservation team, Nick Boys, has unearthed some old footage of the unfortunate process going on.
All right, what I'm really keen to show you now is work that was done during the 1950s by the Ministry of Works. Okay, so we're really focusing on the interior of the chapel.
So this is the application of the cementitious slurry that we always hear about, is it?
Well, yes, it is the application of the surface treatment. Here you can see we've got a man, he's actually cleaning there, I think. So what he's got is a small paintbrush, and this is very similar to the work that we were doing.
Yes.
Now we have this guy who's happy in his work, is applying, you can see just how he's doing it. He's using a 3-inch paintbrush and he's stippling the material on. And that's exactly the material that we can see now.
Right. That white stuff, really.
Yeah. This is the moment when the surface of the stone, as we were intended to view it by the carver, is overpainted. And so there's a fantastic view of that angel figure.
Without the coating
Without the coating on it. And you can just see just how crisp, just how
clear that detail
legible
is.
that
Yes.
carved detail is. To them, that's beautifully smart and you know.
But the thinking behind it, presumably, was that they would just stop the stone crumbling.
That was
really what prompted them to do it?
That was part of it. Okay, so they were responding to a decayed stone surface, but they were also responding to the fact that they obviously could see that there was water coming in through the building. And also there was this really sort of unpleasant visual result of that. Okay, so there would be dead biological growth, there'd be live biological growth, it would have been blotchy.
So really, they would have applied several layers of this thing, would they? Which is why it looks so thick and why there's so much of the detail of the carvings lost.
Exactly, yeah. In fact, when we're going to have a close look at it, you can actually still see the brush marks. You can see just how thickly it's been applied.
In an attempt to reveal the detail of the original carvings, Nick and his team have done some tests to remove the magnesium fluoride. But unfortunately, the techniques available at the moment risk damaging the stonework even more. I'm now very aware of our responsibility to ensure that the conservation techniques we choose will not prove someday to cause more harm than good. For the conservation work, we haven't just had scaffolding on the outside of the chapel, we've had it on the inside as well. It might be a temporary disappointment for visitors, but it allows us to get a close-up look at the astonishing stonework of the chapel's medieval masons.
Nick, we're so close to all this beautiful carving. So where are we heading?
Well, let's have a look at this.
Oh, yes, look. So much detail. I mean, all that carving on the cuff there. And these fingernails. I mean, it matches the one on the other side, doesn't it? Which is superb.
I mean, we are more than 35 feet from the ground here, so you can imagine that none of this was, was carved with the intention of being viewed closely.
No, I think that's what's so astounding. And yet, they just haven't spared any detail at all. I mean, even above the cross there, you've got that little bit of detailed engraving.
And of course, we've seen the footage taken during the 1950s of the man exactly here, using a paintbrush to remove that loose material from each of these.
From these flowers?
Yeah, from these flower motifs.
Exactly. I've never seen that before.
Of course,
I love the way all these ribs are completely different. I mean, the decoration on this is completely different from the decoration on that and the one at the end, look. What else is there in this bay? I love the different carving here. Oh, look, there is another face. And that's a really different face. Look, it's a really sort of calm, serene face, but quite plain. That's quite interesting.
It's very enigmatic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Right, but what's particularly interesting to me, just emerging there, is an oyster shell.
Oh, really?
Right, which is it's a really well-known sort of construction technique of the 15th century to pack construction joints with oyster shells.
You can really see it well, actually.
And the reason for that is that it reduces the mass of mortar. And we still do that nowadays. I mean, for example, we've been working on the outside of this roof, doing exactly the same thing, albeit with a different material.
And look at this level. This is a great level, actually, because you get the light coming in so beautifully from the windows. It's lovely to be able to get a chance to see some of this detail. I mean, this must be one of the tops of the niches of the statues. And, I mean, I've never noticed that it was so incredibly detailed, all this carving.
Precisely. A beautiful chevron detail, is virtually invisible from down below. If you can see that there are these ballflower motifs, and they are beautifully spaced, and there's an exquisite rhythm to them, all the way up until you get to this construction joint, and there you can see that somebody's made a small error.
But for me, that's the charm of this building, because it's just its individuality.
Yeah.
And then, just above it, is Christ with his hand raised in blessing, which I've seen from down below, but I've never managed to see here. And again, just like up above, you've even got the detail on his cuff, which I haven't seen before. So it's probably fair to say that with the exception of the 1950s workmen, probably the only other people who would have seen this carving in this place are the masons who put it there.
Yes, that is entirely possible.
This is a really fascinating carving with 3 heads. And they're so detailed again, but they're really different heads. That's what's so interesting. So this here with the long hair probably signifies somebody of nobility, I would think.
All I can say is the one on the left is certainly happy about his work.
These carvings are an impressive display of masonry and artistic skills. Unfortunately, we know almost nothing.